Federalist 23, Part 2. Before I read the paper to you, let's look at two of the words that are often used in the Federalist. The first one is ambition, and the second one is genius. Remember, I told you genius doesn't necessarily mean the way we use it today. For the most part, it means the prevailing character or spirit of something or a people. So when he says the genius of American people, he says this is something that's the prevailing character or spirit of something amongst us people. This is what most of the people believe about this thing, or see things this way. And then ambition, of course, you remember, the ardent, inordinate desire to rise to high position or to attain rank, influence, distinction, or other preferments. It's not used in a positive way in the Federalist. People who are ambitious are only thinking about themselves. They are looking for a higher rank, higher position, attain influence, make more money, or show themselves, but not for good reason. Not so that they can be a great member of the society. They won't be virtuous. This is the sense that this word is used. Okay, I'll start reading the paper now. The necessity of a constitution, at least equally energetic with the one proposed to the preservation of the Union, is the point at the examination of which we are now arrived. This inquiry will naturally divide itself into three branches. The objects to be provided for by a federal government, the quantity of power necessary to the accomplishment of these objects, the persons upon whom that power ought to operate, its distinction and organization will more properly claim our attention under the succeeding head. So in this next few papers, he's going to tell us more about the new Constitution and the government that's going to be framed by it, the government that's going to be established by it. The principal purposes to be answered by union are these: the common defense of the members, the preservation of the public peace, as well against internal convulsions as external attacks, the regulation of commerce with other nations and between the states, the superintendence of our intercourse, political and commercial, with foreign countries. So these are the four main reasons that he says for establishing this federal government. The federal government has to be able to be answerable in these areas. Be energetic, be of use. Remember that word energy is used a lot, which means something that really, really works for us. He uses the word imbecile when something is not energetic, not sufficient, not acceptable. Then he continues, the authorities essential to the common defense are these: to raise armies, to build and equip fleets. Fleets is for navies, right? To prescribe rules for the government of both, to direct their operations, to provide for their support. These powers ought to exist without limitation, because it is impossible to foresee or to define the extent and variety of national exigencies, and the correspondent extent and variety of the means which may be necessary to satisfy them. See, this part is written with a different print because he says, you cannot tie our hands, limit us by saying exactly, word for word, what we can do, what we can't do, like in the Articles of Confederation. A government sometimes has to face emergencies. They have to do things that if you tie the hand of the government, is not going to be able to do to defend your safety and security. Then he continues, the circumstances that endanger the safety of nations are infinite, and for this reason, no constitutional shackles. You can't put a constitutional chain. No constitutional shackles can wisely be imposed on the power to which the care of it is committed. This power ought to be coextensive with all the possible combinations of such circumstances, and ought to be under the direction of the same councils which are appointed to preside over the common defense. This is one of those truths which to a correct and unprejudiced mind carries its own evidence along with it, and may be obscured but cannot be made plainer by argument and reasoning. It rests upon axioms as simple as they are universal. The means ought to be proportioned to the end. The person from whose agency the attainment of any end is expected ought to possess the means by which it is to be attained. So in other words, you cannot put the government in chain and expect for it to function fully. So when he says constitutional shackles, he's talking about the Articles of Confederation, because they had limited the range of activities of the federal government so much that they couldn't do their work. So he says, you can't do that under this new constitution because we have learned our lessons by now. Then he continues, whether there ought to be a federal government entrusted with the care of the common defense is a question in the first instance open to discussion. But the moment it is decided in the affirmative, it will follow that government ought to be clothed with all the powers requisite to complete execution of its trust. The government should be given, he says clothed, given enough power to do what it's supposed to, what it has been entrusted to it. And unless it can be shown that the circumstances which may affect the public safety are reducible within certain determinate limits, unless the contrary of this position can be fairly and rationally disputed, it must be admitted as a necessary consequence that there can be no limitation of that authority which is to provide for the defense and the protection of the community in any matter essential to its efficacy. That is, in any matter essential to the formation, direction, and support of the national forces. So the national forces, this national army that we need to have, or national fleet that we need to have for our defense, for our common defense, then the government should be able to give it formation, direct it, and support it. In other words, it has to be able to control it, to name admirals to be in charge of the fleets, find generals, and order the generals to train the soldiers. So you want to make sure the Constitution does not shackle the people in charge, does not put them in chain and obstruct them and block them from doing what they're supposed to do. Okay, we'll continue in the next part.